Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Wednesday, the 12th of January. With Robert Murray McShane, today we read Nehemiah chapter 2. Now, Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king, and having heard the story of what had happened to Jerusalem, he goes in to do his duties as cupbearer, and the king sees he's looking sad and asks him, "What's going on?" So he tells the king, "The city of my ancestors is destroyed." And in verse 4 we're told, "The king said to me, 'What is it you want?' Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, 'If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it.'" Now clearly, in my mind, when it says, "I prayed to the God of heaven," he must have, as he stood in front of the king said, "What do you want?" He must have, just in his heart, quickly said, "God, just help me with this." What we today would call an arrow prayer. It seems completely unlikely that he would have stood there and spent 3 minutes mulling over God and praying to God and interceding, or let alone leave the king's presence. And yet in chapter 1, we have a prayer recorded where he says, "Therefore I prayed before the God of heaven, and I said," and he's got 7 verses of prayer recorded. And to me, that is interesting, that you have this long, explicit prayer, and you also have the comment, "I prayed to God," and it must have been a very, very short, almost instantaneous prayer. And interestingly, today, in the New Testament passage we read, Acts chapter 12, we have Peter being arrested, and James has been executed. Herod arrests Peter and is planning to bring him on trial, and we're told that so Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. Peter was arrested, the church started praying, calling on God. And when Peter finally gets out of prison, miraculously, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. So in the New Testament, we have this reflection that the church prayed. When there were problems, they prayed. And that needs to be our approach as well. We need to pray probably far more than we do. And there's no one way of praying. Yes, sometimes we will sit and we'll kneel in the church and we'll pray long prayers. Sometimes we will use formal prayers. Sometimes we can use the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus says, when you pray, use this format. But we're also told in Scripture, Jesus mentions the tax collector who prays to God and just says, "Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner." And so there's 1,000 ways of praying. There's no one way. And we need to finally just pray. As Paul writes to the Philippians in chapter 4 and verse 6, he says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." And so that's what we need to do. Present our requests to God by prayer and petition. And for every single one of us, that'll be different. Every day, it'll be different. Every situation we find ourselves in, it'll be different. And that's an encouragement. There's no one way to pray to God. For us, it's talking to our Father in any way that we do that. So be encouraged to pray to God, knowing that He hears and He does answer.